Good evening. It's 8 o'clock on the 17th of November and time for the latest online meeting of the Charles Close Society. I'm your chairman, Jerry Zeeler, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Stuart Dennison, whose talk is entitled The Charles Close Society Tribute to Rail 200. And I can see we have over 50 delegates. Stuart is a committee member of Charles Close Society, and as well as that, an enthusiastic collector of transport history. Now, with that brief introduction, over to Stuart.
Thank you very much, Jerry. We'll now just share the screen. Right. This evening's talk, as Jerry has said, is the Society's tribute to Rail 200. The scope of this evening's talk is a selective choice of mapping of railways in England and Wales. The rather rich mapping heritage of Scotland will have to be a separate event. To keep it within reasonable time, I'm only concentrating in England and Wales this evening, and we will be trying to cover a reasonably representative sample covering the full 200 years since the Stockton and Darlington Railway opened. And I'll start with this. You think that's a good map? I only say this because I'm not actually going to cover the Stockton and Darlington Railway. There's one good reason. We have good old George Stephenson on the left, and when it started, the Stockton and Darlington was very good as a steam railway if you were a lump of coal. If you were human, you went, in the original carriage was on the right, which I'm afraid George Stephenson may have had many sterling qualities, but coach building probably wasn't one of them. And that garden shed on wheels was the first coach on the Stockton and Darlington, and it was horse-drawn. And although they improved them, they were still horse-drawn till 1833. So a lot of attention to the Stockton and Darlington and proving its value. Nonetheless, in the way of capturing the public attention, it probably certainly didn't develop in passenger traffic, which actually any passenger traffic started after the coal traffic because it simply wasn't thought of in the original design. So if we move on to the 1830s, once you have the Liverpool and Manchester opening in 1830, that really did capture the public attention, and it launched all manner of interesting guides, because not only were you going from A to B, but describing the route and the great attractions of it. And these are three. I mean, there's lots of the 1830s guides, but three that I've used in this, and I'll give you the maps from them. The History and Description of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which was privately published by Taylor in 1832. It was a very good little book on the history of the line and the maps. Also, is Cornish's Grand Junction, which also incorporates the Liverpool and Manchester, which is 1837, and Osborne's London and Birmingham Railway Guide of 1838. So, the 1832, the line was quite crudely drawn, but to give some impression also of gradients, and so that it was slightly vertical as well as horizontal. Give you a section of it. And at this time, they were very proud of both their engines and the carriages. And the recurring theme at this time with guides is not only show you the line, but show you the stock as well. The interesting side, of course, is that at the Liverpool end, you wound down in a tunnel, and it was although it had some fairly formidable works coming out through things like Olive Mount cutting and that coming out of Liverpool, much of it was actually very level. Of course, going across Chat Moss, it had to be level, unless it was going to have a slight sinking. The Grand Junction, this is a great long concertina of a guide, so I've done it in two halves. section showing inclinations, etc., etc. So it's giving you distance, the actual gradient, you've got the gradient bar, as well as the plan. And obviously the Grand Junction came as a elongated T of the Liverpool and Manchester. So this is the northern end of it. And again, exactly the same with about the inclines and about the stock. And although it shows, I mean, it might be quite fanciful, what it actually does show is private carriages, and I'll come on to that later on, because obviously that loading horse boxes or whatever and private carriages did figure in layouts later. That's the other half of it, which in grand keeping with the elongated T at 90 degrees, you've got the perpendicular Liverpool and Manchester shown. But again, coming the whole way down to Birmingham, you notice the rather interesting little curl as we come into Birmingham, because it is not the Wolverhampton New Street, it's actually going around the north of Birmingham and coming round, so that it is, well, more or less facing west-northwest, although it's come from the northwest, and again with the gradients. So that published by Cornish's guide, and I mean it's simple, but for the time, you think of the people that would be likely to be buying the guide, using the service. I think it's giving good information, and it also is giving, I think, interesting information on gradients, even if the ordinary traveller probably wasn't too concerned. The next one, if I may, is Osborne's. Now, Osborne's map of the London and Birmingham. I don't know in this particular order, because also not only the order of printing, but it's the order of opening, because although the London and Birmingham started in 1837, didn't turn up to Birmingham, and it arrived at Birmingham as a Johnny come lately after the Grand Junction had got there. That's the overall plan, which in a minute I'm going to just forgotten who the publisher was. No, he's not the one. There we are. Right, it was published 1838 by E.C. and W. Osborne of Venice, Birmingham. And as it says, reduced rather from the Ordnance Survey and engraved by D. Smith of Great Charles Street, Birmingham. Finish shuffling that around, and then if I move, you get a detail of it, because you can't see much of that. You can't see that at all, right? Anyway, going back to that, it is very detailed, and one of the interesting things with this map is actually showing you distances from stations. But anyway, so that's I mean, it really set the heart of the network going. So you could go London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, so which was I think a tremendous stride forward, whole thing within 8 years. Wishel's guide, they came out in 1840 and 1842. The 1842 one includes a map dated 1841. Now, some of the map is wishful thinking, but the solid lines, the dark black lines, are the extent, certainly in across from York and Lancaster down, and just how much actually had opened. So although the West Coast main line would have terminated at Lancaster, it hadn't gone over Shap rather at that point, the the East Coast Main Line may have taken a rather different route because there wasn't a Great Northern to go up. But you could actually get there through Rugby, beyond Derby, and then roundabout route up to York, and then onwards and up the Tyne. So it was actually a remarkably complete network within a very short time. You're looking at this is the position 11 years after the Liverpool and Manchester opened. Some of the speculation didn't happen. You'll notice, I'll get my cursor over here. This interesting line, Shrewsbury, round with Montgomery, through Llanidloes, over the Cambrians, and ending up in Aberystwyth with mythical. The Cambrian Railway, as later became, took a very different route from Newtown across to over here to the Machynlleth and down. This was revived, and this broadly, there were several schemes, but one of them was the Manchester and Milford, which we will come on to. The Manchester and Milford being remarkable because it actually ran from about there to there and got nowhere near either Manchester or Milford Haven. But I think the Wishaw is a tremendous asset, a review of all the railways of Great Britain at the time. And I think there are some other interesting bits. I mean, obviously the broken lines are ones which are not as yet finished. I mean, some of the there are some oddities. Newcastle under Lyme becomes Newcastle under Line, but other things like, I mean, obviously the Chester and Holyhead is shown as sweeping majestically across Anglesey and Holyhead, but of course that was merely a plan in 1841, and a while before that got realised. Again, simple name of the owning companies, but I think really clear and pretty informative. There are lots of these, Sheffins, Sharps and whatever, and the jolly old Sharps corresponding maps. I've just given a sample of one of the pages. It's dated 1840. It clearly is later than that because it has lines like the Eastbourne line, which opened in 1849, and others. I mean, that's quite common. I mean, I've got a first series map of Surrey, allegedly dated 1816, but you know the engraving date didn't change in those days when you railways. So the railway to Guildford, which actually arrived in 1845, is still shown on a map which allegedly is 1816. So dates you need to take with a bit of a pinch of salt. But it's quite a pleasant map. One of the good things, one of my tests for these is whether the Canterbury and Whitstable, which was isolated from the rest of the network, makes it. On some it gets almost an afterthought, and others it gets omitted totally, but it's there okay. Right. This is the same map. You can see published for Chapman and Hall in the Strand. It was when you show it, it's interesting how far the South Devon had actually got. I mean, it still had a way to go to get to Devonport and Plymouth, and of course you had the odd isolated line west of it, and the Liskeard and Looe isolated too. At this point, there's no London South Western withered arm making its way down to Exeter and the rest of Devon. And had this, which was the terminus, the end of the line from the then London South Western, had the rather roundabout, the so-called Castleman's Corkscrew, going round the New Forest here, rather than the route to what was to become Bournemouth and Poole. So again, it's not a wonderful map, but it actually, I think, it would have served the purpose, certainly for anyone just using it, touring as a guide. Now I come on to the Meesham's guide. Meesham, sorry. This is Meesham's the guide to the London and South Western Railway. And what is interesting, this is 1856. This predates the connection down to Portsmouth, and the Portsmouth, what became the Portsmouth line, finished at Godalming. And what I was describing before over here is a rather roundabout route around the New Forest and down through Poole. It was profusely illustrated, Meesham's. All of them were with plenty of engravings, and I think it is an interesting map, quite a historical record in some ways of how Salisbury was connected to Bishopstoke, later Eastleigh, but not directly from Waterloo, which has only got as far as Andover. And you had the line down to Dorchester, and that was the finish of it. So it was, again, a very simple thing, but it illustrates the period, the huge growth, both in tourism, particularly. I mean, these books would not be particularly cheap, so that they were not aimed at the third-class traveller on the cheapest ticket. But nonetheless, it shows that there was the market, and either they responded to the market or they're developing it, depending on your view. The next one I wanted to give you is one from 1860, which is Black's Iron Highway. And Black's Iron Highway ran the whole way down from on the maps from over here, Edinburgh and Carlisle. Apologies to Scots, Glasgow, down through Carlisle and the whole way down, with a few odd quirks in orientation until you arrive in the straight line down in London. Very detailed, very long, because it's 14 panels. I mean, if you take to try and flatten it out a bit for the photograph, I mean, the whole thing must be, a good 3 foot long, because there's 2 snake weights, and I mean, you can tell that it's way beyond that. And if we have a look at the detail of that, I mean, I actually think that these are not only very clear, I think they're very, very well produced. I mean, as an example of how the orientation got a bit strange. I mean, you've got Carlisle on one page, and then you get on the next page, and you've got Carlisle again at a different orientation. Showing obviously the lines, but I think the features, the geography around it. It's a Bartholomew's map, published by Black, so I mean they couldn't be more well known than that. But you can tell actually that I think the quality of it, and obviously you're going around the Lake District on this sheet. So I mean you've got the principal fells and whatever clearly shown. So I think that too is an interesting one. If you get right down to Birmingham, what this does is actually show how Birmingham, what I was saying before with the Grand Junction, it didn't go that route, which would be through New Street and on that. That's in the 1850s. Before that, the Grand Junction was simply round into Birmingham, into Curzon Street. Alongside it came the line from London, the line down from Derby, and the one coming up the Bristol and Gloucester. Now I want to go forward a little bit. This is in the 1870s, And an example where we move from a map to much more of a plan of the layout, because one of the things, especially the Great Western main station, was the one-sided station, effectively, where, if I'm fully illustrated, you've got up and down both on here. I know there is a later island, but effectively this is mixed gauge. You've got broad and narrow gauge, even though some of the sidings would be like, well, this one's rather interesting. From a little wagon turntable, you got that's mixed gauge and that's broad gauge only. No idea why, but the thing is that it's quite an awkward arrangement with the crossover there. But I suppose given the volume of traffic, it wasn't insuperable. Whilst you could go straight by, anything stopping, there was always quite an extensive area because the refreshment, you're dealing with a period before on the Great Western, the glorious refreshment cars. So you needed actually to get everybody off, quick dash to the refreshment room and then back on the train. Hence, you got one side with a very extensive area and the other side with less so. Huge circulating area there. And I think, I mean, you think, well, it seems odd having you've got the main line coming through and you've got wagon turntables there. But of course, that wouldn't have been that you'd either come up that way or that way. So actually, it's the other way around, but never mind. I think that it's an interesting plan, and the interest to me is the mixed gauge, the broad gauge, very much the way that things are set out. Horse boxes, carriage transport, whatever, that would have been very much to the fore, and hence you will often find things coming at right angles through a turntable, which of course in much later practice it wouldn't be there. The isolated little one marked terminus is the southeastern route coming up from Red Hill and through Guildford up to there. Now, so that seems straightforward, southeastern down here, Great Western there. However, when you look at the diagrams the Railway Clearinghouse produced, and although this one is 1920, I mean, it's the same thing there, it actually shows that the connection, that's the Southeastern and Chatham one, the Great Western there. The interesting, I think, with the goods, which took you on a 3-mile run round Reading to come back to the almost where you started. And with this, the Waterloo line coming here, and it had the junction so it could actually connect properly with the Great Western Main Line. It's the first that I'm showing of the Railway Clearinghouse junction diagrams. I have the 1922 version, and with these, it actually, you throw in the Railway Clearinghouse maps, these and the Railway Clearinghouse handbook of stations, and if you were sending goods or whatever, you could actually work out companies, distance, and more importantly, facilities at the station at either end. The mere fact that Bear Alston's got absolutely nothing to do with Reading and Woking is just because the to cut the number of pages down, the engravings would be alongside each other, even if geographically, of course. One's the Tamar Valley and the other is Berkshire. Now we're coming into London. It's still in the 1870s, and what you've got King's Cross and St Pancras. The big difference with that and with the later of both those stations, certainly at King's Cross, it is the what happened to the suburban traffic. These were very much one side arrivals, one side departures, with just carriage lines in the middle. You've got exactly the same at St Pancras. We will get the little lines of these, which were a very small run of turntables. Again, it's still of a period that if you wanted to go and take your carriage, you might not take the horse, you could do, but you certainly took the carriage, then there need to be a means quickly of being able to get that from one line to another. And you've got the same thing further over. Now, right, so that's all right. Did it not have any suburban traffic? Well, the answer is yes, it did. It had a platform here at York Road, which then disappeared, and you ended up at the Metropolitan station, with the Metropolitan line running under the Euston Road. And coming up this glorious curve. Later on, all of this became the outer suburban services were in platforms on that side. But at that point, and you've got exactly the same, although King's Cross 1850, St Pancras 1868, you've got very similar, where it's one side arrival, one side departure, and again the same with underneath the link and the curve to the Metropolitan station and on to Moorgate. So an interesting, I think, period piece, the 1870s. It also shows actually that how clear at that point King's Cross was of buildings, which it then went back to that, but there was a long period when all manner of not too wonderful buildings were built along here, so that it was actually quite a mess. But that I think is something. Much of it, like the gasworks, although a lot, I mean, the houses,
Stuart,
much of that would be recognizable.
Sorry to interrupt you, but someone's made the point in chat. Is it possible to make yourself a little louder, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The volume here is okay, but you've got a little bit of echo on you. So I wonder if does your microphone need moving a tad?
Well, I don't know. Is this all right? Can people hear that?
That sounds fine at the moment.
Okay, well, I'll lean a bit closer. Apologies if the voice drops.
Great stuff. Thank you very much.
Right. So for those of you that can still hear, here we've got Euston. Now Euston, I think, is a very interesting layout. Again, this is the 1870s. The reason for this that it is, I mean, it looks like it's two stations in one, and there's good reason for that, because the original idea of the London and Birmingham was coming in this side, and the Great Western not coming to Paddington but coming in the other. I'm afraid it didn't quite work out that way, and then the Great Western went its own way, which meant you had this rather unusual shape. You also had the London and North Western had a number of carriage sheds both sides, and what happened with that, in many ways, it was completely outdated, and it did actually for years limit the length of carriages that could be used on the Euston line. Originally, of course, it was down an incline from Camden, so that originally it would have been rope hauled into Euston, but after that you had this rather interesting arrangement. But again, very much the single arrival, single departure, with numerous turntables, not timetables, in between. And coming over here, carriage shed, and that would, of course, down the middle would have been traverser. So the carriage shed, in many respects, has got a bit more of a look of a tram depot, but nonetheless, and very much open at this end, but I think it is again very much of the period where it was very simple. Everything arrived on one platform, everything went out on another. Now over here, we'll come back to that. Very detailed. I mean, obviously, it's one in not 1 in 500. It's 1 in 1056. The this part, I mean, obviously, is showing the detail. Obviously, this is the Great Hall, as was at Euston, and the statue. And we'll come back to the statue a bit later on. As a complete aside, this is always around Cardington Street, and although it's completely rebuilt, it does have an interest because quite a few of the maps that I've used did actually come from Collector's Corner at Euston, which was there. So it's a little bit of personal. Of course, the great run with maps is always the Railway Clearinghouse, with each company shown separately. This is from the Cumberland and Westmoreland districts map. This is quite a late pre-grouping one, 1921. But marvellous detail, got the distances. In some of the areas like this, I mean, obviously the Lake District again showing quite a bit of the detail. But I actually think that they're a model of clarity, apart from in some of the conurbations where it does get muddled. But generally, there's a bit of a plethora of lines. There is a little inset to clarify. And ditto later on Whitehaven. I mean, that obviously it's quite a large map. That's just effectively equivalent of a couple of segments of it. But those, of course, cover the whole country and Scotland and Ireland and Wales. Can you hear all right, Jerry? Yep, right.
Yes, that's fine at the moment. I think it's a bit of low bandwidth actually, because it's sort of catching up with itself every few minutes.
Oh, I see.
I think we have to live with it.
Right. These, no prizes for where these came from, because pretty obviously they're straight off the National Library of Scotland. And you may remember earlier when I talked about the odd line on Wishaw going across the Cambrians to Aberystwyth. Well, when the Manchester and Milford, which had grand ideas of a sort of southwest Wales to northwest England direct route, was planned, it was going to cross the Cambrians beyond Devil's Bridge, a tunnel underneath the highest points, and coming out beyond Llangurig and joining what became the Mid Wales line at Llanidloes. It got built from the earthworks as far as Llangurig, which you can see on there. It's shown as abandoned railway here, but I don't know. Abandoned as in, yes, they're not going to do anything with it, but abandoned as in, actually, it never opened. So it was never finished, and it just stayed there as a nice little earthwork for a good century or more. There were various plans in the 1850s to go across, ultimately across the Cambrians. Ultimately, of course, the Newtown and Mahathlyth went the route which stays today. So, I mean, that's just an excerpt of the 6-inch map. To illustrate it further, you'll see here with this point is as far west as it ever got. it later did a little detour. It abandoned coming towards Manchester, and the other side of the Cambrians went across and to Aberystwyth. So it never did cross. It never got further than this. This point on the Envise Esav. And the interesting part really is it ended up stopped in a field, and there went off the idea. Frankly, I think it was a case of engineering difficulties and money, but that stayed certainly up until 50 odd years ago. Whether it's the same now, but I mean, I've seen this site. It must have been in about 1970, and you could still see the route, as it were, across the fields, and the earthworks had been, quite complete the whole way, and then it just ceased. So that stayed. It's there on a map. That's on the 1886 published map, but it never got anywhere. So moving along, and now go on to some railway. I've taken examples of railway maps from railway timetables. We start with the pre-grouping ones. Here, the 1910-1911 Great Northern, and quite a typical, but I mean, it's clear enough. With some of the connecting lines, of course, had absolutely nothing to do with the Great Northern, but they did have some connecting services, and the main part, of course, the whole way from King's Cross going north. But I think it's quite a clear presentation as an overall system map. You're going to struggle when you get into South Yorkshire and across, but I think quite neatly done. And there's several separate maps that are included in the timetable for smaller areas, and that to me is really all that you could want if you were a traveller. I think it actually sets it out very clearly. It shows other lines, and for some reason the line across to Stafford was Great Northern. This lot was the North Stafford, which is sort of purloined, but I suppose it probably for the sake of completeness. But other lines that it crosses, obviously a lot of these, you've got the Midland, London, North Western. It doesn't claim any ownership of, but here it adds the North Staffordshire lines. It was part of the Great Northern, which of course it never was. The next one is the Midland, and you have to give the Midland credit for it didn't waste its money on sort of fancy design. It says what it is fair and squarely. The Midland timetables, didn't even put railway. Again, similar to the Great, in fact, got quite a clear. I mean, obviously it's a different type of presentation. It's covering a longer area, but the overall system map showing the pages, which I always thought was interesting, showing pages rather than table numbers, because it means if you did have a drastic change, you've probably got quite a bit of change in the numbers that you need to put on the map. And that too had a series of smaller sectional maps, and that one being the southern one, and the one at the bottom, because the Midland had its ownership of the London, Tilbury and Southend, that was shown as separate blocks on it. But again, simple but informative, and I mean to me sufficiently clear. If you're a traveller, you got the lot there. You can see where to change. You can see the page number for that particular service, and I think it's actually rather well presented. The third one I'm going to give you is the North Staffordshire. The North Staffordshire is, in my view, an interesting line because it its strategic importance, it was always, should it be taken over by the London North Western, the Midland, with it further on the Great Central, and the western side, the Great Western. Everybody over the years probably had a go, but it always kept its independence. And one of the things that it did manage to do was to, it was securing some statutory powers to get to Liverpool. And in the end, you had the London and North Western coming to a sensible agreement where it gave goods access to the North Staffordshire to Liverpool, which obviously the docks there, very valuable trade. And at the other end, it did mean that London North Western had running all over the North Staffordshire. So you'll find that the North Staffordshire is included on all the London North Western maps, which I think has got some justification. I don't think it's got any on the Great Northern one. This one, I think, is got some interesting points, because one of the things that the North Staffordshire was a great canal owner, because it the Trenton Mersey Canal and the Calden Canal. So it, you say Trenton Mersey carried on, of course, the Trent. With this, the nice sort of loop round to Liverpool, that is just running powers. It was London North Western. Equally, Manchester, although it is shared in the Manchester-Stoke service going on to London. Manchester Macclesfield wasn't North Staffordshire, that was London North Western. And the whole of this, from Norton Bridge, going away Stafford, Birmingham, round to College, all of that too was London North Western. So it's a clear map, not too misleading in my view, another 1914 one. But I quite like the presentation. I think there's reasonable use of colour, and the little line on there goes with the little narrow gauge leak and manifold valley. But very much a company in-house map, but nonetheless, I think an interesting one. Now we're going to go on to Liverpool. The Liverpool Overhead Railway was, as it sounds, an overhead railway that ran the whole length of the docks in Liverpool. The Dockers' umbrella, for good reason, because the whole of the line was properly surfaced so that the rainwater would not drip on the dock estate beneath it. That is the full extent going from Dingle, because although it was an overhead railway, after the extension to Dingle, it started in a tunnel, but the rest of it was majestically marching along on arches the whole way up to Seaforth, and then went on to the Lancashire and Yorkshire. I think I mean, this is from a guide issued in about 1935. It's got 1933 stats, but I think it's slightly later. And of course, this wasn't the vast bulk of the trade, were the workers going to the docks, and obviously that the docks of the full length of them. But it also was very much for tourist traffic, hence the guide, hence the buildings, identifying all the docks, so that you could, for a very reasonable fare, go by electric train and have a look at all the shipping the whole way down it. Now, that's a blow-up of it, then expanded view of the centre. And I actually think, although, I mean, obviously, you're not going for strict accuracy, but what you have got there is something which is more than just a diagram. It actually, I think, it does give the principal buildings that you're seeing, and plus all the docks. So I mean, I think it actually is a good representation for its purpose.
Stuart, can I just say that some gentlemen have kindly put some interesting things in chat, which I'll run through later on.
Yeah, excellent.
If I may just interrupt at this point,
Please do.
just to say on the Liverpool Overhead Railway, in Rail Engineer magazine this month or last month, there was a picture of a Liverpool overhead train and the electric light signals, which it reliably probably tells us were the first in use in Britain. That's all.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, although the city in South London beat it because it opened in 1890, this was 1893. It had its own power station, and it did go, you're quite rightly saying, for electric signalling. It was years ahead of its time. Coming back, no, thank you for that. I mean, this is obviously the centre of it. The Liver building is just off the top, and the rock office there. This is the coming across is the overhead railway. It was always very much just two lines, very little in crossovers. Some interesting, especially when you get on the pier head, the trams, because obviously you've got the trams and the circles over there. But the thing that I like with any of these, and I'll show you in another one in a minute, is these odd little lines coming across, because that had nothing to do with the overhead railway. It's because the dock railway was running directly underneath it. But the other interesting part of that is you've got all the detail, all the tram detail. The Mersey Railway coming across is just in tunnel. And when it gets to James Street Station here, there's no platform, there's no anything. I mean, it doesn't show any lines at all. But what it did, of course, is where went under the Mersey onto James Street and then onto Central. Moving to the next one, the two ones here. The left-hand one is just showing further on the dots. As you get when you look at the junction diagram book, the Railway Clearinghouse, gives you an idea of how the companies all came in, and of course, this is the end of the dock estate, and all the companies were at 90 degrees to it, feeding in. And this shows the London North Western, Lancashire and Yorkshire goods depot. The detail of it, I think, is wonderful for cranes, travelling cranes, all the turntables, whatever. And again, all these lines coming miraculously here, nothing really to do with the Liverpool overhead. That just went over the top of the lot of them. And the Docks and Harbour Board that had its railway beneath it and across it. But it also shows what a plethora of companies you actually had coming in. And it included some ones where you'd have companies like the Midland that would only have got there with the Cheshire Lines Committee, but have its own things like here, would have its own goods station. So that shows pretty well the extent of the docks, and as I say, James Street into Central. That was James Street before, and Canada Dock, which is on the left here, is here. So I'm afraid it shut in 56. Great shame. I'd love to have gone on it, but never mind. Now I'm going to take as an example of the use of maps and the development of an area. This is Guildford, the 1871 map. Bearing in mind, I said before that it would by then have got to Portsmouth, but originally it was Guildford in 1845 and then extended to Godalming, not far south. Not untypical again of the 1870s period. The engine sheds over here with the turntable, wagon turntable, where you've got horse box, carriage box, and whatever would have been serviced at the side from that, and the cattle pens. The interesting bit around here is the chalk pit that it just went through. This is Fairfield Tunnel, and I mean much of the layout around here you recognise today. But what I think is interesting when you look at Guildford a bit later on Here we're getting much later on, we're into the 20th century. You've now got a much more, this is much more conventional layout with umpteen platforms, 2 lines in between. The engine shed has moved from here to here, and there are 1 or 2 of these around here where they very much a sort of semi-roundhouse affair. That's swallowed up the chalk quarry that as was, and I think it shows how outmoded really the sort of layouts of the 1870s were once you got into the current century. Then moving further on, it's a much later in the 30s now, and here you've got a better idea, I think, of how, with all the suburban traffic and other traffic, the engine shed grew. So you've still got the outline of the chalk quarry, but probably 40%, getting on about half of it, is now engine shed rather than chalk quarry. And of course, it is developed into a major commuter station. So I mean, you could take umpteen of these. I just took that as one selective example of how you can take the railway map showing the development down the years. Now I'm going to come on to one which makes its way to Tavern. The Woodman Pub is where Jerry, chairman, has his CCS show and tell meetings. Still there, same site as it would have been on this map. Highgate Station is an interesting one. It's on the Great Northern, and it's interesting because both the tunnels were twin single bore tunnels. So with that, you had a great gap in between the running lines. You just got the cutting in between. Great gap between the running lines, rather like Great Western broad gauge station platforms later used for standard gauge. And that is certainly in the 1870s how it would have appeared, just that and a simple crossover line. And what happened later to that was this, which it is something which survives this day, even though it's been out of use for years, which instead of either side, it completely changed to a single island platform with just the one running line. There's no good sidings, nothing else there. And now, of course, with the extension of the northern line of the underground, the 1930s, that is beneath here, and the run up to the station now is to the underground beneath. Although this is an area still stays, and I think it's this tunnel which is preserved because of the it's now the residence of bats, not to be touched. Looking at other maps, Bartholomew's, this is produced in 1927, which is their railway map showing the new grouping, the 23 grouping, obviously with the big 4. Pleasantly enough done, quite clear. Not that larger scale. I mean, but it's a Bartholomew decent enough effort. One of the things that it did show in the corner was the ramifications of the London area, and of course this is showing it geographically rather than the diagrammatic use of the underground services. So again, I think considering the amount of detail it's showing, including things like the underground services, I think it is well, to me a pleasing and relatively clear presentation. Oddly, on this map, for reasons beyond me, it includes a little inset for the Channel Islands. And the Channel Islands had two small lines, Jersey and Jersey Eastern, and on obviously on Jersey. Nothing else at all, but it merited its little box. I mean, to be honest, you at Jersey, you wouldn't need a railway map to navigate their lines. Bacon's, who similarly were good old, what was his name? Washington Bacon produced his maps, and they too, I think, were in obviously the Ordnance Survey based in the same way that Bartholomew did, and quite neatly done. Nice use of colour. I mean, it's obviously the North Wales map. Interesting, some of the things that would be on here, things like that, which is the Croeser tramway, which wouldn't have been open to passengers. I mean, that was big slate carrying. The Festiniog, and this, of course, was what was the North Wales narrow gauge, then became later the Welsh Island. But further up, not shown on here, you can see that things like the Holywell branch of 1912 are absent. So I haven't been exactly able to date it, but I was thinking it's somewhere in the 1905-ish period. Things like this, the Aberystwyth and Welsh coast, I mean, that as the name of owning company ended when the formation of the Cambrian Railways in the 1860s. But I suppose the name of the line, it always stayed because that is exactly what it is. Line from Aberystwyth round to Pwllheli on the Welsh coast. A similar map, but lacking colour, is one produced from the London North Western. Again, a Bartholomew's offering, the basis of it. And this too it must be post 1912 because that's the Holywell branch. And although at first glance it looks quite big, busy with all the mountains. I mean, actually, when you get down to examining the LNWR lines, I'd suggest it is relatively clear, and obviously one with a bit of geographical accuracy. That is it. I mean, in greater detail. So I mean, if you look at the thing closely, I think it's actually rather a well-produced map and tremendous amount of detail. If you want to know the railways on all the sandbanks and everything, which wouldn't exactly be uppermost in your mind. The LNWR also did rather nice map in a nice hard case of the whole of the British Isles. Bearing in mind that it had services with the Dundalk, Newry and Greenore, so it had Northern Ireland as well. And the little insert it has for London, I think, is rather pleasantly done, including the tube railways, such as they were, because the central line became as Shepherd's Bush to Bank only. It's post the Second World War when it sailed off towards Loughton, Woodford and so on. It reached Golders Green on coming north, but this Highgate, which is now Archway, the Highgate you saw before is the next station on, which obviously is a later development in the 30s. But again, a simple enough, but a clear presentation. Now, because this is from Bradshaw's timetable, October 1894. They came monthly, and the only hint to the month is right in the middle here, because bear in mind, although it's now in three different parts, this map, I mean, when it was a continuous sheet, I mean, this was just towards the top. I like how many minutes slow it is of Greenwich along the top. And it does show, obviously, as it says, the Great Britain and Ireland, the whole lot. It is remarkably detailed. Again, page numbers, not table numbers. frankly quite hard to read when you get in areas around London. Others not so bad. Tremendous amount of detail on sailings, which don't ask me why, for a railway timetable, but nonetheless. And sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But I was going to say, I think that it's very busy. It conveys a lot. But if you really wanted a station, say you were going to Hertford, you'd actually look in the station index, I would suggest, rather if you didn't know the area at all, trying to take pot luck and as to, well, what is that? Which one does 164 cover this way or does it go that way? I mean, it's to me, it's quite confused. It's also because it was a monthly production, the paper's extremely flimsy. And after well over a century, as you can see, it's somewhat disintegrated. Now, coming as an example, I've just done me out. As an example of the Big Four, this is the LNER, London North Eastern, did one map of the entire system and then sectional maps. These, I think, are frankly, I think they're a model of clarity. I think they're very well produced. And obviously, it's got the Great Eastern X, Great Northern X, and the Great Central. But I think that they're obviously they were company in-house jobs, but I think they did rather clearly with those. Now we're coming much more up to date into British Rail. This is 1988 and a section of their standard map in the days when they did the huge timetable. Obviously here, these are not page numbers, these are table numbers. And although the thing is far more simplified, where you've got ramifications of routes, they're in separate inserts, separate sections. But you know, I thought a worthy enough effort, and you do get a very clear idea from the start what are the main lines and what are the connecting ones, the branches. And then there's not too much more in case anybody's worrying. Here's just one example of a page, looking at a page of books, a page of drawings which were submitted in parliamentary session 0809 by the London North Western. And this is not the clearest, but actually it's showing acquiring some land in the middle, and this is Crewe Works. So, I mean, very detailed. Some of these have the look of they've taken a bit of Ordnance Survey, but it's quite clear a lot of the railway estate is the railway surveyors rather than OS. An estate plan, a typical 40 foot to the inch. If it looks a bit corrugated, that's because it's normally rolled up, the cloth. It's about 11 feet long, and this is just the central bit of it, showing Avon Wen, which although is Great Western, is where there's the connecting line from Bangor, the London North Western, came in on this side. And it's quite, although a simple station, and you're there exposed, this is Cardigan Bay, and the groins along here. And the beach is here. So exposed is the understatement of all time. If the wind was in a particular direction, but I think with some of these, they are they're interesting from the sheer detail that they actually give, which of course also is down to each building and the use of each room. And there are some which are just interesting to me. I mean, this is just a perfectly standard, issued in the 1870s, quarter-inch map. It's quarter sheet, rather, in North Wales. Now, the interesting part of that, you think, well, what on earth is it? Is to take one segment, and this is the Festiniog Railway. That is modern day Tanabov, Haverthlin was the station then. Going around, and it's this which is the interest, because it was surveyed in 1842. The line opened in 1836 as a gravity haul line the whole way down the quarries. Blinders didn't really exist as a town. It was just the quarries were there, but when they started, it didn't even have proper accommodation for people working there. And here, because of the time it took in boring the original Moylwind Tunnel, it had a rather interesting, everything was gravity and a nice easy grade the whole way down, apart from here where it had two inclined planes, one up, one side, up to the top and down, until the tunnel got complete. And it just happens that when the OS survey of this area was done, it just captured that period which had gone by 1844. Now we go on to postcards. This is the one that I had in the flyer in the CCS newsletter. The Midland Railway did a number of railway postcards showing their system and the connections. This was the one with the direct route to Yorkshire watering places. I like that with Harrogate, even though you might think that if that was a direct route, I don't know what the Great Northern and Northeastern one was, but rather pleasant. And it is a postcard. I think it's 1907 it was actually posted, you know, the mark on the other side. Another one, which is the same, this is much larger than it is in reality, postcard that the Southeastern Chatham did of their entire system. And it's incredibly small print. And although it shows a nice Wainwright 440 in one side, I mean, you do have to say, either making it a bit more diagrammatic and less detailed might actually have worked better, because although you can probably see if you've got a decent sized screen in front of you now, I would suggest you would really struggle to make anything of it on a conventional postcard size. We now go on to different areas where maps, and the tiled map. This is one of the two famous tile maps at Victoria Station, with the London, Brighton and South Coast. Interesting that they've been kept. All this reflection is because all the lighting from the shops directly opposite, I couldn't actually manage to take a photograph without the reflection showing, but nonetheless well preserved. And some bits are interesting, not least of which is the shape of the Isle of Wight on this. The London, Brighton and South Coast, you see, has got all of the Isle of Wight Railway, Isle of Wight Central and Freshwater Yarmouth and Newport. Didn't own any of it. What it had was a half share of the mile and a half or so from Ryde Pier Head to Ryde St John's Road, which had a half share. The other half was the London and South Western. But a little bit of license there to actually include the every railway on the island. That's the huge one in Manchester, is it? The great tile map of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. It's the LBSC one's 1908, and I think this one predates it, but it's I think a not too dissimilar period. But I mean, it's informative, and obviously it's got all the going off screen, all the places where the ships, from Goole and Hull, and obviously that side. And the final one is our old friend the Northeastern, which I mean, you can get repro ones now, but the Northeastern had tiled maps of its system, numerous stations, and of course quite a few of them are no longer with us, which is unfortunate. But I always thought that these were they're very well produced, and I mean, there's places like, I think the NRM at York sell reproduction copies of them. They're all very pleasantly done, and we're coming to the end. This is the it's not a map, it's a diagram, I know, but this to me is classic Harry Beck. He's really Henry Beck, but never mind. And that is the 59 map. And to me, it for a complex network, I think it is exemplary, the clarity of it. And then you get a recent offering, 2019, which is to me studying confusion. Quite white on a map where all of this in the centre of London, you need to know the service out to Reading or out to Shenfield. I know that you've got the Elizabeth line and everything else, but nonetheless, to me, there is so much on it. Busy isn't the word for it, and it is basic information of getting from A to B. I think you would struggle, and also geographically, there's some not just the distortion that you'd expect in the centre of London, but the rest of it is well, the lines going east-west on here actually are going south, but never mind. So I don't think an awful lot of that. I'm now taking you back to the map that you saw before for one reason, and that is I said about having the Great Hall at Euston, and here we have the statue. And the statue is there, and it's of George Stephenson, where we started with the Stockton and Darlington. And that's your lot. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Excuse this, sounds off. We have a car alarm going, of course, but thank you so much, Stuart. That was more than a small sport. It was a feast of railway mapping. Thank you so much indeed. There have been quite a few things I wanted to join in at several points there. I remember Scarborough, when I lived there, had a beautiful tiled map. I think that may be the one you just showed, but I hope that survived. They've spent a fortune redoing the Victoria one, I know.
Yes,
had it professionally done. Listen, there's lots of comments in chat, and I think there's frankly too many to read through one after the other. Does anyone who has submitted a message or information to chat, does anyone want to say it again live? If you do, raise a hand and I'll come to you. Let me just check if anyone's doing so. No. But, wonderful.
Shy.
Let me any points or questions or amplifications from anyone for Stuart while we've got him?
Yeah.
Yes,
William.
William.
Yeah, I'm just very interested in the Iron Road map, the Black's Bartholomew, 1861. I've got my copy of Black's Guide to England of 1858 in front of me, and it's 4 of the maps from that sort of strung together.
Yes, yeah.
One long thing. So obviously they were recycling it. Obviously thought it worth publishing it as a separate map to show the whole route from Glasgow to London.
Yeah, it's interesting that it is. I mean, if you were using it as a guidebook, I mean, this thing I think is 14 or 16 pages of it all joined together. It's completely impractical, but nonetheless, it's a lovely quality map, though.
It is, yes. And just one very brief point, if I may, Jerry. Just for anyone who doesn't know it, the side of the chalk pit, which was the engine shed at Guildford, is now a very large multi-storey car park.
Wasn't going to ruin it.
I
think the days of steam locomotives being shedded and turned at Guildford are rather long time ago.
I'll just pick out one or two points made in chats. Peter Jones says that many lines never built are filed in the House of Commons Library, and as well the GWR Trust at Didcot. So
I'm not sure if am I on mute, Jerry?
No,
I can hear someone.
Okay. Yes, we have chair the Great Western Trust at Didcot, and we have an awful lot of Great Western plans, signal diagrams. We've got a 48-inch scanner down there as well. So if you're ever in the Didcot area, do feel free to get in touch with us. Most of the chaps it's an accessioned, recognised Arts Council museum, and we have accessioned many of our maps, but we can also reproduce them if most of the chaps on the accessioning work are down there on Tuesdays from about 10 till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you have to phone through on the site in the winter, but in the summer, of course, we're open pretty much May through to September, October. And we have also, I've donated a number of maps down there, railway clearinghouse maps and others that have come up in auction. And the one I referred to, which is particularly interesting, is about 3 meters square. It's a geological map of the OS from the 1880s, 1890s, showing an attempt by some venture capitalists, basically, to build a line from Basingstoke to Bristol to try and get the then London South Western to compete with the Great Western from Paddington, which never saw the light of day. But it's a very, well, it's a fascinating map because of course it also shows the physical blockages through the geology that the railways had to contend with, which you don't always get on a white background.
Thank you, Peter. The man himself, Mr. Didcot. Thank you very much.
It's interesting, actually. The point.
Sorry, Stuart's got a reply there.
I was just going to just quickly say, it's interesting when you actually look at the parliamentary plans. With some of these, you take the Holywell branch, 1.5 miles of it in North Wales, and there's 4 or 5 different acts that they got. There's umpteen plans, and if you took the one that I didn't show it tonight, but I mean that of the changes for Holywell. I mean, what became Holywell Junction, it's completely different what finally got built to what was submitted in that. So, yeah, the real historical interest, but there's often you can be a little bit misled if you if you take them all as thinking, well, if that got the act, it will be exactly like it. Sorry, I interrupted. Someone else was trying to speak.
Thank you, Stuart. Alan Drain's got a point.
May I ask something?
Just about the House of Lords Library. They're very helpful. I have used them for research and authenticated maps that I've found there. But my main things was usually involved in putting the parliamentary changes British Railways and British Rail used to do every year, which involved some maps, not always of great detail.
Yeah, thank you.
May I ask a question?
Thank you, Alan. Who is this? Roger Smith?
Roger Smith, yes. May I ask? It's not really a question, just a comment. I was going to say that the Midland postcard and some of the other Midland maps show very straight routes, and I was interested in that because the route from, through Market Harbour and so on, that part of the Midlands is extremely curvaceous. That's the correct word for railways that are not straight. The Midland map is shown, as incredibly straight. And I also picked up on the Somerset and Dorset, which they of course had an interest in, going from Bristol from Bath to Bournemouth. That was far from straight and very difficult, of course, getting through the Mendip. So it's amazing how they simplified it for their marketing. Not a rare thing to do.
It's very true. There's quite a few examples where it's a little bit of artistic license.
Very much so.
Thank you very much. Am I unmuted?
You are indeed.
I'm doing it the easy way. From Holland, Michiel Rademakers wanted to make a point.
I was interested in your map of the Manchester and Milford Haven, because when we had the the yearly gathering in Aberystwyth, I traveled to the area, and I'm very much at a loss. How could anybody in the right mind have this idea when they built it until what you said? It stops in the middle, and it was supposed to go to Strata, Florida, and then to Milford Haven. But between those two, they had to build a gigantic viaduct over the little river, and that was the reason the whole plan sank.
Yeah.
When you have this idea of building, why don't you first make a good tracé? Have you found anything about that?
No, I've found that. I mean, there are three competing rather ideas for routes, two from one company and a third one, but all of them suffered from the fact that at one point you were going to get a very lengthy tunnel going through the Cambrians. I mean, it is. Here's a big hill. Let's head for it. It is almost. I mean, it simply wasn't the. Yeah, it was never practical. And although when you look at the Cambrian line looks a bit strange, but I mean, obviously it's following valleys, and it's to me the only logical route west-east that you could get over into mid Wales.
I traveled it with my car right along the Elan Valley, and the total desolation. There was nothing there but brilliant hills all around, nice green flat hills.
Yeah.
Why
above the tree line?
You're right. It was the tunnel and it was the big viaduct which killed the plan, because much too expensive.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, any other points for Stuart? Otherwise, I'm going to thank him profusely for a heck of a lot of work that went into all of that. And thank you so much, Stuart. It was great. I shall look forward to seeing it again. I do apologise. Although I had pressed the button, it hadn't started recording, had it? So I'll make a date with you to put a front end on that before it goes online.
I'll say it all again.
Say it all again, yeah, but not just now. Unless you want to. But thank you everyone for coming. That was a great turnout from all over Europe, as well as the country. And I hope you found and saw stuff of great interest there. So Stuart, thank you so much. And here's to another. Oh, Rob's doing the clap. So let's do show your applause if you'd like to, folks. But Rob made a point as well about
thank you very much.
Similarities, which I will alert you to earlier on. Sharp's maps, he said, were influenced by Hudson. But you'll know more of that than I will. Oh, how clever. Do you know, I've never seen this before. There are clapping hands floating across my screen. Whatever next.
Put more water in it, Jerry, when you're seeing clapping hands moving.
Now, if anyone wants a good Christmas present, John Davis has got a new book coming out about bus maps. You'll remember his talk a few months back. Well, it's become a book, complete with a preface by Lord Hendy, no less. Ding, ding. John, look forward to seeing that very much indeed. And give us the title. Press your space bar to unmute.
I've done it. Have I unmuted?
Yes, you have now.
There we go. It's the rise and demise of the bus map. And it will appear in the middle of December. We'll put a note out about it.
Excellent. We'll do that within CCS and
within CCS
and
with your special discount code.
Get it reviewed. Now you're talking dirty.
So that may be the first of our Zoom talks. It's evolved into print, but let's hope more of them do.
Indeed, it might well. But thank you, everyone, and I wish you all